She was a black girl who believed she had escaped struggle by marrying a powerful mafia boss. But on her wedding night, the man she trusted makes a cruel and unthinkable demand involving his father, shattering her belief in love, protection, and power. This is a story of betrayal, survival, and a woman who refuses to be owned. Let's start. New York glittered like a promise you couldn't afford to believe. Silas Vane watched it from the back booth of the Blue Note Velvet, where the music was sweet enough to make you forget the men at the door carried guns. He owned the club, the block, and, depending on the night, half the city's sphere. People said Silas didn't fall in love. He collected favours, secrets, lives. Then Imani stepped onto the stage. She wore midnight silk and no jewellery, like she refused to borrow light from anyone. When she sang, the room softened. Even the hardest men lowered their eyes, as if her voice made them remember they'd once been human. Her notes were honey and smoke, and when she finished, applause hit the walls like rain. Silas didn't clap. He just stared, sharp and still, a man measuring a risk. Imani worked 2 jobs and still couldn't keep up with the bills that came with her mother's illness. The city had a way of turning sickness into a sentence. Silas learned her story the way he learned everything, through whispers, receipts, and men who owed him more than money. The next night, a $10,000 tip appeared on her table. The night after that, roses arrived. Too many for one woman, enough to embarrass a whole room. A week later, her mother's outstanding debts vanished, paid in full by an unnamed donor. Imani didn't smile. She didn't swoon. She went to the manager's office and demanded to know who was buying her heir. The manager, pale, sweating, only nodded toward the back booth. Silas was there, half hidden, wearing a suit so dark it seemed to drink the light. His gaze held the blunt certainty of a man used to yes. Imani walked up anyway. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands were fists tight at her sides. Silas leaned forward, just enough to show he was listening. His knuckles were scraped as if he'd recently argued with something that hit back. "Because you don't belong to this place," he said, like the club was a gutter and she was a jewel. "I belong where I stand," Imani replied, "and I don't accept charity." "Then don't call it charity." His eyes slid over her like a vow he hadn't earned. "Call it investment." That should have been the end of it. Imani walking away, Silas returning to the cold machinery of his empire. But the city didn't run on endings. It ran on pressure. Over the months, Silas became a shadow that kept her safe. A stalker who'd been waiting outside her apartment stopped showing up. A landlord who'd been threatening eviction suddenly apologized and offered repairs. When a man grabbed her arm outside the club, Silas's guard intervened so fast the air seemed to snap. Imani hated the comfort of it. She hated how protection could feel like affection when you'd lived too long without either. And Silas, ruthless, untouchable, started looking at her like he wanted out of his own skin. One night, after closing, he met her by the service hallway where the neon couldn't reach. "You're the only beautiful thing in my ugly world," he said, and for a moment his voice sounded almost human. Imani's heart made a mistake. She let herself believe that a man like Silas could build something clean with dirty hands. When Silas asked her to marry him, New York held its breath, because everybody knew what it meant to wear the Vane name. Imani said yes anyway, and somewhere far above the city, in a penthouse lined with glass and silence, Don Alistair Vane, Silas's retired father, smiled like a storm gathering. The wedding didn't feel real until the doors opened. Imani stood at the entrance of the cathedral in a gown that cost more than the building she'd grown up in. Black diamonds scattered across the bodice like captured starlight, and the white lace beneath made her skin glow, warm, rich, undeniable. Cameras flashed. Strangers cried. New York's elite smiled as if love was something money could host. Silas waited at the altar, flawless and composed, a mafia king pretending to be a groom. When Imani reached him, his hand found hers with possessive certainty, fingers tightening just a little too much. "You look like you were made for this," he murmured. Imani searched his face for softness and found it, small and rare, like a candle in a vault. "I wasn't made for anything," she whispered back. "I chose." The vows were expensive words spoken under holy arches. Silas promised protection, devotion, forever. When he slid the ring onto her finger, it was heavy enough to remind her that even love could feel like a shackle if the wrong man held the other end. The reception was a spectacle of wealth, a ballroom filled with orchids and crystal, violins and champagne, a ceiling of lights arranged to mimic the night sky. Silas spent millions like it was nothing. He pulled Imani into dance after dance, his palm firm on her back, guiding her as if he owned not only the floor, but the air around her. "You're mine now, Imani," he said against her ear, voice low, "bound to the vain name, forever." The words landed strange, half romance, half warning. Imani forced a smile for the guests, for the cameras, for the narrative being sold tonight. Poor singer rescued by powerful man, crowned as queen. A fairy tale stitched with money. But as the music swelled, Imani noticed things the guests didn't. A circle of men never left the walls. Silas's guards, stiff and watchful, hands near their jackets. Conversation stopped when Silas moved past, then restarted in softer tones. And, across the room, Don Alistair Vane sat like an old lion. Silver hair slicked back, eyes small and cutting. He didn't smile at the bride. He studied her. When Silas approached his father to pay respect, the air between them sharpened. Alistair said something quiet, and Silas's jaw clenched. Imani couldn't hear the words, but she saw her husband's posture change. The slightest bend of the spine, like instinct, like obedience. It made her stomach tighten. Later, as guests drifted toward limousines and private after-parties, Imani climbed into the elevator with Silas, heading for the penthouse suite prepared for their first night as husband and wife. The elevator walls reflected them, her glowing in white, him draped in black, a contrast so perfect it felt staged. Silas's phone buzzed twice. He glanced at it, then turned it face down. "Is something wrong?" Imani asked. Silas kissed her temple. The kiss was gentle, the man was not. "Nothing," he lied. "Tonight is ours." But when the elevator opened and they stepped into the penthouse hallway, 2 guards were already there, stationed like statues. And Silas's expression had shifted into something she hadn't seen on him before. Fear. Imani's breath caught. "Silas?" He didn't answer right away. He stared at the suite door as if it were a courtroom. "Silas," she repeated, sharper now. "What's going on?" He swallowed, the movement visible in his throat. "Just go inside," he said. "I'll be right behind you." Imani hesitated. Every instinct she'd sharpened in poverty, every lesson about locked doors and hidden costs, rose in her chest. But she stepped into the suite anyway, because she was newly married, because she wanted to trust, because hope was a stubborn thing. The door shut behind her with a soft click. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below like a jewelry tray of lights. A chilled bottle of champagne waited. The bed was layered with silk, everything arranged like a dream. Imani moved through it slowly, the quiet growing heavier by the second. Minutes passed. Silas didn't come. Then she heard another click. The door opened again. Imani turned, expecting her husband. It wasn't Silas. It was Don Alistair Vane, filling the doorway with his expensive cologne. His cigar smoke passed, and the cold certainty of a man who believed tradition was permission. Imani's spine went rigid. "You're in the wrong place," she said, voice controlled. Alistair's mouth curved, not kind. "No," he replied. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Imani didn't move back. She didn't give him an inch. "This is my suite," she said. "Leave." Don Alistair stepped inside as if the penthouse belonged to him, which, in his mind, it probably did. He shut the door behind him with a careful, deliberate click that made the room feel smaller. "You're new," he said, strolling toward the windows. "You don't understand how the Vane family works." Imani's throat tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "I understand boundaries." Alistair laughed softly, like she'd told a joke. He turned, eyes pale and predatory. "In this family, boundaries are things we buy or break." Imani's pulse thudded in her ears. She stepped sideways, closer to the hallway that led toward the door, toward escape. "If you don't leave," she warned, "I'll scream." "And who will come?" Alistair asked, almost curious. "The guards?" He tilted his head. "Or my son?" Imani froze. Alistair's smile sharpened. "There's an old law," he continued, voice smooth as polished stone. "A blood tithe. The father claims the bride's first night, not for pleasure." He lied with ease, "but for loyalty. To remind the boss that everything he has comes through me." Imani felt the room tilt. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, that's not real, that's not—" "It is real," Alistair said, "because we make it real." Imani lunged for the door. Alistair didn't grab her. He didn't need to. The door swung open and there, in the hallway, stood Silas. He was positioned like a man waiting for execution, head bowed, shoulders tight. 2 guards behind him, faces blank, hands folded in front of their suits. Imani stared at her husband like he'd just turned into someone else. "Silas," she breathed, "tell him to leave." Silas didn't look up. Imani stepped into the hallway, the hem of her gown whispering against the carpet. "Silas!" Her voice cracked on his name. "Tell this man he's wrong." Silas's lips parted. A hollow exhale. When he finally lifted his eyes, they were ruined. Guilt flooding them, shame making them dull. "It's the way it has to be," he said. Imani blinked hard, like the words were smoke, and she could clear them away. "What did you just say?" Silas's voice dropped, pleading. "I gave my word. I can't lead this family if I break my father's laws. It's one night. Please, for me, just endure it." For a second, the hallway went silent except for Imani's heartbeat pounding like a drum of warning. Then the betrayal hit. Not sharp, heavy, like a door slamming shut on her life. Imani stepped back as if Silas had struck her. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of them. "You want me to endure him," she said slowly, tasting each word. "You want me to survive your father because you're scared of disobeying." Silas flinched. "Imani, you bought me," she cut in, voice trembling with rage. "You didn't love me. You used money like a trap because you knew I had nowhere else to go. You aren't your boss, Silas. You're a boy playing with his father's toys." Silas's face crumpled, but he didn't move. He didn't stop it. That was the moment Imani understood the truth. His protection was never protection if it could be revoked. His love was never love if it could be negotiated. Alistair stepped into the hallway behind her, too close. "Enough," he said, impatient. Imani turned her head slightly, eyes darting, searching. Her gaze snagged on a side table inside the suite. A heavy silver letter opener sat there, decorative and sharp, catching the light from the city. Her breath slowed. Her mind became crystal clear. She stepped backward into the suite as if surrendering. Alistair followed, satisfied. The guards stayed put. Silas stayed frozen. Imani reached the side table, and in one swift motion, she grabbed the letter opener. Alistair's eyes widened just as she swung. The blade sliced across his forearm. Clean and vicious. Blood bloomed dark against his expensive suit. His shout tore through the penthouse like shattered glass. Alistair stumbled back, clutching his arm, shock twisting his face into something ugly and animal. Blood slid between his fingers and dripped onto the pale carpet like spilled ink. Imani didn't wait for him to recover. She didn't scream. She didn't apologize. She moved with the clean urgency of someone who finally understood that mercy was a luxury she couldn't afford. Silas appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound. For the first time all night, he looked awake, eyes wide, skin drained of colour. "Imani," he started, voice breaking. She turned on him, letter opener still in her hand, and the sight of her in the torn edge of innocence stopped him cold. Her gown was still radiant, but now it looked like a costume somebody had tried to force onto a warrior. Imani's fingers went to her ring. The massive diamond caught the penthouse light, throwing it back like a cruel joke. She yanked it off and hurled it at Silas's feet. It landed with a hard, final clink, the sound of a door locking forever. "I came from nothing," she said, voice low and lethal, "and I'd rather go back to nothing than be a slave to a family of cowards." Silas's mouth opened, but no words came, because there were no words that could unmake what he'd done, what he hadn't done. Behind her, Alistair lunged forward again, rage overriding pain. Imani pivoted, snatched a champagne bottle from the table, and smashed it against the edge of the counter. Glass burst like lightning. She held the jagged neck out, steady. Alistair hesitated, not because he feared the glass, because he feared the story. The scandal, the loss of control. Imani used that hesitation like a door. She ran, barefoot now, the heels abandoned somewhere on the carpet, of a life she no longer wanted. She sprinted out of the suite and into the hallway. One guard stepped forward on instinct. She shoved past him hard, her shoulder slamming into his chest. Another reached for her wrist. She twisted free, pain sparking, but momentum winning. The service stairwell was exactly where she'd memorized it to be. Because poor girls memorize exits. Poor girls learn that locked doors come in many forms. Imani threw herself down the stairs, dress gathered in her fists, lungs burning, heart hammering. 20 floors became a blur of concrete and terror and clarity. Somewhere above, voices erupted. Silas shouting orders too late, guards pounding after her, Alistair's furious roar echoing like a curse. But Imani was already gone. Outside, the city hit her like cold water. The night air smelled of exhaust and street food and freedom. She ran until her legs shook, until the wedding lace tore at the seams, until the world stopped, feeling like it was tilting. She didn't hide like a frightened bride. She disappeared like a decision. In the weeks that followed, she moved through New York's underbelly with new eyes. She remembered every name she'd overheard in Silas's halls, every location he'd mentioned too casually, every account number hidden behind "Trust me." She contacted the one person Silas never bothered to threaten, an old bartender with quiet connections, a man who'd seen empires rise and rot. Within days, Imani was out. Europe swallowed her. She became a ghost between cities. Paris, Milan, Prague, always moving, always learning. In a small gym above a closed bookstore, she met a retired intelligence officer who didn't ask her to be soft. He watched her hit a bag until her knuckles bled and nodded once, like he understood anger as a kind of fuel. For 2 years, Imani trained. Discipline replaced fear. Strategy replaced panic. She learned how power moved, through money, leverage, and patience. Back in New York, the vain empire started to crack. Silas, hollowed out by guilt, became reckless. Paranoia ate him alive. The old laws he protected turned against him like teeth. And when he finally killed his father, it didn't cleanse him. It only proved what Imani had said. He didn't destroy the monster to save her. He destroyed it because he couldn't stand being smaller than it. The night Imani returned, she didn't wear silk. She wore black. She stood behind Silas in his office, gun pressed to his neck, her voice calm as winter. "Don't move." Silas whispered her name like prayer. Imani. She stepped into the light, sharp, steady, untouched by his money now. "I didn't come back for you," she said. "I came back for what you took." Silas laughed, broken. "Then finish it." Imani lowered the gun. "Death is too easy," she said. "You'll live, but you'll live with nothing." By dawn, federal sirens cut through the city. Files had been delivered, accounts drained, men flipped. The empire that once owned the night began collapsing in real time. Imani walked away before the first handcuffs clicked. And later, far from neon, far from vain blood, she moved her mother somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. She built something that couldn't be bought, a foundation for girls like her, girls who needed exits, education, and the kind of power no man could claim. She didn't become a mafia queen. She became her own name.